Hey, all you badasses out there in badass fantasy baseball land. This is a live stream, and this is Rudy, your host, coming at you tonight on Sunday evening. And we are about ready. Boy, if you can't get excited right now, right fucking now, about fantasy baseball, I don't know where your head is, but it's in the wrong damn place. I'm here to tell you. So, man, we got a lot to talk about today, certainly, and we're going to get to it. We're going to get hot on it. I wanted to welcome all you folks that took the time to come out here and join me tonight and talk some fantasy fucking baseball. I'm trying to pull something up right now, really, to be honest with you. So as soon as I get this shit pulled up here, like I've always said, and I'll say it time and time again, this production is me, myself, and I, and I'm not always real hot with this technology stuff, but I'm giving it my best try. I'm giving it my badass best try. I do want to thank you again for tuning in. I want you to, first of all, talk to you about joining the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast League. If you're interested in joining that 12-team standard categories league and play with your host, Rudy Rudolph, in the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast League, we'll be doing that. We'll be drafting here soon. So we'll talk about that on important dates coming up. But you can go to www.badazz, and that's 2 Z's, badazzsports.com. www.badazzsports.com. There's a registration link there, and it'll shoot you right over to the Yahoo platform and get you signed up to our BadAzz League. Remember, as always, tuning into this, my desire, my goal is to help you become a better fantasy baseball player, or just come to the community to be a community of like-minded people who love fantasy baseball and talking fantasy baseball. And this is hot time in Georgia. I'm in Texas, but man, it's draft mania time right now. Just remember, one of my mottos is if you suck, then that's your fault. Okay, and that's the truth. So tune in and let's get busy and talk about fantasy baseball and where we're at right now on the calendar and what we could be doing to get better and be badasses. So you badasses, one thing you got to know is we got 18 days to OFD. OFD is opening fucking day. So 18 days to OFD. 18 days to OFD. Yeah, it's exciting times. In the words of someone I don't know, if you're not confused, you don't understand the situation. I wish I could give them credit, whoever said that, but it's funny. Again, my name is Rudy, and I'm your host of the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast. This is our live stream that we do weekly on Sunday nights at 7 Central Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, that is. So welcome from wherever you're coming from. If you're picking this up later on YouTube or checking it out on an audio stream, we are, again, 18 days before go time, so to speak. So it's March 12th of 2023, and this is coming to you from Alvin, Texas, just south of Houston, home of Nolan Ryan, hometown. He don't live here anymore, and Nathan Evaldi. Both went to Alvin High School. So I wanted to talk about what I wanted to do is I wanted to go into a couple things real quick. Excuse me. And if you'd like to reach out during the podcast, you certainly can throw in a chat on the YouTube channel as you're watching the live stream and say hello. I'm going to give some credits here and talk about my organizational structure as far as my fantasy baseball teams are, how they're structured and how that goes. So I'm going to go to a screen view here. Oops, wrong one. So we'll go to this. Okay, there we are. Okay. You'll see on the screen as you're watching that this is the BadAzz team, and I wanted to try to focus in on this so you know kind of what if you didn't understand your role in fantasy baseball. It's just a pretty basic concept, but I want to go over it. At least I have a few tweaks to it, but my team, obviously, when you have a fantasy baseball team, you're the general manager and the manager. So imagine yourself in the real role of in relation to the reality counterpart of baseball, the real baseball. That's you're basically serving two fucking jobs without pay. So you better have fun at this. Because if you're playing for money, that's a different thing. There's a different level of how you're going about playing when you're playing for money. But in this case, if you're just playing for fun and what have you, those are two pretty lofty jobs, believe it or not, for having fun. So to get the most out of it is try to focus primarily on fun. I don't hear that a lot in the fantasy baseball podcast world, but I think it's really important. So imagine this is your role, two fucking positions, no pay, and what do you need? What do you need that goes beyond you on that team to make you successful? If you're striving to be competitive and be perform at a high level and compete in fantasy baseball, I feel like you need an analytics department if you're a general manager, right? Well, as you can see, I have an analytics department. And remember, I'm not playing for money. You're not playing for money, I don't think, but if you are, okay. But this analytics team I have in my budget as a general manager and manager costs me $0. It does cost me time, and people say time is money, and yes, so there is a time element to this, meaning you're utilizing my analytics department, which, as you can see here, is CBS Fantasy Baseball, their podcast, wonderful data and analysis from Frank, Scott, Chris, and Chris. And then from the Fantasy Pros, which, by the way, has Chris, the same Chris here, the Welsh. He's in both those analytic departments with Joey P. So those guys are really good. And again, I could go down a whole list of podcasts, Pitcher List and Rates and Barrels and The Athletic. And there's just literally tons of them, and they're all really good in their own way. And I don't pretend to be better than any of them. But if you feel like you can get something out of listening or watching this podcast and joining this community, then that's why I'm here. But this is my analytics department. Thanks, guys. Invaluable. This is invaluable as a general manager, fantasy baseball, to establish something relative to an analytics, to get data, to get information, unless you're interested in doing all that yourself. Hey, and if you want to do that, that's cool. Bring your ideas to me. Hey, join the analytics department in our community. I can't pay you anything, though. But anyway, this is getting data that I can move on with the rest of the parts of my team to have a successful fantasy baseball year. So over here we got BadAzz Fantasy Baseball entity is basically my strategies and implementation department. Oh gosh. I know it sounds funny, don't it? I made that shit up. I thought it sounded pretty cool actually. I don't know. How about you? How do y'all feel about that? But anyway, that is really what I develop and put into my own efforts after I receive the information from my analytics department, and I weigh that with things like I talk about other factors. Other factors are big to me because um, it injects you firmly into building your rosters and fielding your teams. So other factors are formed through our BadAzz fantasy baseball. I'll talk about that a lot. And of course, that department is hosted and ran by me, myself, and I, which at most times is one person, but sometimes has to be more. So then, once you establish strategies and implementation ideas in accordance with what you learn from spending, you know, um, maybe an hour through the week a day or on weekends, maybe half an hour if you're tight on time. But if you can get an hour a day in and listen to your analytics department, that'll be a good hour spent for sure. And then you take that and translate that information in your strategies to implement into whatever draft board, at this time, draft boards, your tiers list or whatever you're developing. That all happens here. And then your last is your platform that you use. The platform, whatever you use, my particular choice is Yahoo, but I've played on all of them and they're all fantastic, whether it's CBS, ESPN, and just a ton of other ones, or if you're an FBC guy. Those are all great, but I choose my primary or my default or whatever you want to call it, my choice leagues are in Yahoo Fantasy Baseball. So that's kind of like the governing body, because their leagues, unless I become a commissioner and establish my own league within Yahoo Fantasy Baseball, Yahoo Fantasy Baseball, or whoever starts that league, establishes the rules and the scoring for that league. So I call that the governing body. But it's basically, like I said, your platform that you're going to play on and the league rules and scoring as established in a standard format by Yahoo and public leagues, or as established in private leagues by commissioners. So, and then at the top we get fulfill the circle, and we're back up to your badass self. So just replace this picture with your picture, and we can move forward. So, like I said, I need an analytics department, and honestly, analytics generally are boring and time. I'm gonna give you three. I'm gonna give you a couple good reasons here, or whatever, about analytics. One is boring and time consuming for the most part. Actually, that's two. Okay, number two, or is this three? It's depending on how analytic you are. I could rationalize that this is either or, But, okay, fuck it. This is three. If I spend a lot of time doing research in the minutia that is baseball statistics, I'm going to drift further away from the things that I like about playing and getting away, and it's going to take me further away from what I liked about what I like. God dang, talk. What I like about playing, and it gets me away from my strengths in fantasy baseball, or at least how I perceive my strengths. I want to merge the attributes of analytics from my analytics department, as we discussed, with other factors that are important to me. the general manager, but also me as just a fan. For example, I'll factor in the value of playing on a good team or one that's on the rise. And I don't do that simply to just because I'm giving a player a bump because they're in a good batting lineup for hitters. Everyone that plays fantasy baseball knows that has value. But to truly personalize my roster and be competitive, I like to also factor in whether a fantasy player is on a winning team. Just in general, a winning team. It may not have the absolute strongest roster, but it's a balanced team that's a winning team, and I like to have players that are on those good teams. Also, something I talked about earlier in the BadAzz sessions, those learning blocks that I have posted out on video platforms, social media platforms, and audio listening platforms, where we talked about another factor could be for you. I live in Texas, so I'm in the central time zone, but I think where players are matter, especially if you buy into the concept of, and let me switch screens here real quick. Especially if you buy into the concept of, I want to play fantasy baseball and dedicate some amount of my free time over a 6-month period, that I want to own it and have some fun and be competitive. I'm combining the two. Yes, you can do them both. You can do it and put a human element into it and say, if I live on the East Coast, for example, you guys out on the East Coast, hey, how you doing? Howdy, y'all. But anyway, if you're on the East Coast and you draft players that, like, you draft some Angels players and some Dodgers and Padres, Mariners, what have you, Giants, I don't want to leave them on. You draft a bunch of players on those rosters, and let's say you like to watch baseball, be engaged, and do the eye test on players, but you love to watch baseball. Well, are you going to be up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to finish watching those games through the week, if you're going to catch some games, or even on the weekend? Now, if that fits your schedule, because your work schedule, that's a good fit for you, then that's fine. I'm just saying, time zones matter too. If you're really wanting to have fun and enjoy watching most of your players when you can, I know there's, you can record stuff and all that, but I'm just saying that is a factor that, I don't hear people talking about, but I think that's a kind of human factor as a general manager of a fantasy baseball team you should consider. And that's vice versa for you folks out there on the West Coast. If you pick a bunch of East Coast players, you're going to find yourself, if you work days, you're going to be still at work when almost all of your players are playing. So I guess if you want to record it and stuff, that's fine. But I don't have that big of an issue with that. I draft people on both sides of the coast, but that's by virtue of me being in the central time zone. It just doesn't affect me that much. But I could see how it could affect some people geographically. Again, thanks to my analytics department, who is currently prepping me for my drafts and helping me be a better fantasy player. Some important dates coming up. Next Sunday night at 7 p.m. Central Time, the same bat channel, same bat time, and all that shit. Right here will be another live stream on Sunday night as we get closer to OFD. 18 days to OFD. And it'll be even closer next week. March 23rd through the 26th, for those of you who are interested, the NFBC holds their live drafts in Las Vegas. So they also hold many online leagues and drafts that you can draft from your home. But those live drafts are going on again that weekend. That's Thursday through Sunday. March 26th, that's a Sunday, coming up, is your one and only BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast League Draft. You almost need a drink of water just to say that damn name. But anyway, that draft is going to take place live right here on our live stream, March 26th at 7 p.m. Central Time. If you haven't signed up for the BadAzz Fantasy Podcast League yet, get over to our website, click on the link, and let's get signed up. And you will become a part of the podcast on the 26th of March. You will become a part of the BadAzz universe. All right, some news. I posted a special edition on your favorite streaming platforms. I typically real quick do YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and have audio, my audio and these live streams on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So, but I don't have all these other ones. I know there's a ton of other platforms and formats, but I just can't keep up with. I'm not going to keep up. I'm in retirement. Come on, folks. I'm just trying to do this to form a great community out there. And that's what we're doing. So, but I did put a special edition out there, hopefully to help you with your draft. Something that I have injected into my draft plans this year. And I wanted to give it a name and a focus, because I think even though it's a basic idea, I think if you use it within your draft planning and then apply it, give some mock drafts a shot after you do this, I think you'll find that you'll be better at your draft, at your in-drafting decisions. So this is going to be a little bit of a practical exercise. A little bit. I'm going to break away from the video screen here in a few, and we'll go to my tiers list, and I'll kind of explain to you what I'm talking about. But first of all, I'm just going to give you some background on this idea. It's called backdrafting. Yes, I called it backdrafting. And if you go into, again, this is all covered more in depth in that special edition, so please go check that out. Backdrafting is just essentially flipping. Well, let me just show you real quick. So I'll give you like a preview of backdrafting. Backdrafting, well, I don't need to give you this visual. You can think that you don't need this. Just imagine this concept. How many times, have you went into a mock draft recently or in years past, and you're in that mock draft, and the draft starts out relatively, predictable. I mean, depending on your draft position, if you're mock drafting enough, you get a flow of who you're targeting and who's available at what parts of drafts. And you already have that sense by having a good tiers list set up. But I contend, or at least in my experience, at times I have found myself challenged, as most of you probably, as the later rounds come on. As you get to the later rounds down the draft board, that's where some of these hiccups, I think, come in. And I think it's because mock drafting, in my opinion, is exercising your tools in a realistic setting so that you can test those tools. Are they working, and make adjustments to them so they do achieve your drafting goals. So because I felt like I wasn't as strong in these other tiers later, I came up with a perspective of changing my thought process before I go into mock drafting and start drafting from the back end with my thoughts. What I mean by that is essentially taking your thought process about preparing for drafts is I'm starting with round one. Back drafting just says I'm starting down here in my league that has 23 rounds of drafting for 23 roster slots in a standard 12-team league is what I'm talking about. So you're going to have 23 rounds of drafting. And in my case, for my draft tools, I have 23 tiers. I break it down in that way. So you're flipping that, and you're going immediately without looking and focusing in anything about the top of the draft. You're going to flip to the 23rd round and your 23rd tier. In my case, a tier. Whatever draft board you choose to use that's fine. So let me go to screen view and I'll show you what I'm talking about real quick. And we'll go more in depth again on the. Here we go. So take that off. Nope. There we go. Okay. So like a tiers list, I mean, and this is just a working, I don't know if it's days old at least, I think. So looking at this list, I have it broken down in tiers, and here's 8, and we're scrolling down through the, hold on, try to get a little bigger here. So we'll go down to 23. So without even starting to look, because we know who's all up here at our top, we've worked this over and over. And how many times have you started, honestly, on a fantasy mock draft and stop or let it go to auto draft, or you had too many robots in the draft to start, and it just wasn't realistic enough for you. And in my opinion, I like to have as many humans as I can in that draft, the draft group that I'm going to mock draft in. Okay, so if I'm at round 23, what I do is I'm looking at players that I would put in my starting roster spots that would start every day. Starting from the bottom, who could I see in that position? And essentially what I do is develop what I call these positional red lines to tell me when it's the last person in a position that I'm going to draft, that I want to draft. And then I develop flags that flag me before that last person, that gives me a shot at someone earlier if I don't want to wait for the last one. So it's really giving me a visual. It helps me with a little bit of speed and in my in-draft decision making. And I think for that, I think it's a valuable tool. So, but anyway, that's more to that when you check out that the video it's already posted, or the audio versions again. And that's backdrafting from Rudy, your host, right here. If you're in the mock drafting mode right now and you've been doing mock drafting and you've really maybe churned that mock drafting up and did several, you are tracking pretty good still. I think there's many leagues here in the next week to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I should say, that will be drafted. I mean, this is a really draft heavy time right now. So if you're not mock drafting, you need to get mock drafting now, and hopefully you have some tools built. But if you don't have tools built, or you're not sure your tools are effective, you can get caught up real quick. Go back and look at some of my BadAzz sessions that are posted. That'll help you get your tools together, get you caught up so you can get mock drafting. Because you really need to get your ass moving on that quick. If you want to be a badass, don't be a dumbass. Yeah, put your draft strategy together and start doing that. And do it in the platform that you intend to play your leagues in. Again, very important. It's like the old Army adage. I spent 21 years in the Army. It's like train as you fight. And you should apply that to fantasy baseball in the fact that if you mock draft in as close to the reality that draft day will be, you'll just be more effective. It'll be a hell of a lot more fun, and you won't get trapped in a round and not know who to pick. Because believe me, it happens to a lot of people. It happens to a lot of them people that pick up their damn phone and remember they got a draft coming up in like 30 minutes and just pick up the phone and just wing it. Have fun with that. If you choose to do that, let me know. And, hey, maybe it'll work out, especially if you're a waiver wire guru. And I assure you we'll be talking a lot about that during the end season, because I believe that's where champions are made, is on the waiver wire. And more to follow on that. Make sure also when you're out there mock drafting, as a reminder that you're drafting in the game format that you intend to play in. I know in Yahoo's particular platform, they offer drafts in for 8-team league scenarios, 10-team, 12-team, and then also break it down in head-to-head and roto. So make sure you are mock drafting in the league, that format, game format that you intend to play in. Or if you're playing in all of them, then mock draft in each one of them. So, and the whole intent in that is so you're training as you fight, or you're testing your draft tools in the most realistic conditions short of the actual draft. Make sure also you're jumping around different positions, draft positions. You select those when you do mock drafting in Yahoo especially. And you can go into any draft position that's available on the board. And we talk about that in BadAzz sessions on draft preparation. So go check that out. And you have some good practical exercises on that as well. But essentially, again, just train as you fight, and think of using your draft tools and testing them against the use of mock drafting. All right. I wanted to challenge people out there, or anybody who may be catching this later that's not on the live stream, is to sell me on a 15-team, 30-plus roster spot league. I just cannot be sold on it. I'm not being trying to be combative in any way for people who do like those leagues, but sell me on it. If you're playing in those type of leagues, I know NFBC is really stakes their claim on that format. And I'm not here to beat up NFBC. I've played NFBC. I enjoy it. I enjoyed it to an extent. But think about this. From my perspective, a 15-team league with 30-plus roster spots, you're dealing with 450 players that are going to be drafted, 450 players that are going to be rostered throughout the season within your league. Now compare that to the standard. Compare that to the standard league. Oh, I hope that's a hot date. Compare that to the standard league that I like to talk about, use as a kind of a default when we talk about fantasy baseball, and that's the 12-team standard league with 23 roster spots for a total of 276 players in those leagues that are drafted and 276 players that are rostered throughout the season. And you're going to really have to sell me on this too. I know NFBC does this, but 5 outfielders on your roster, starting 5 outfielders and 2 catchers. Are you in any of those leagues? Fuck that. I can't see it. I played NFBC, and that's kind of one of them beefs I had about it was just personally me. I did not enjoy the idea of drafting to those depths in baseball. I love baseball, but I don't want to be in leagues where I'm drafting in the bowels of mediocrity. And no offense, these are all professional players, and anybody who's playing Major League Baseball is one of very few in the world that play at the level they play. They're the greatest players in the world, right? I just don't like hitters like in a league where you have go to 450 player depths, you're going to be having people on your bench or on your roster, God forbid, not starting shit. Like Jason Hayward, Joey Wendell, for example, and pitchers like Jimmy Herget and Ken Waldachek. Those are going to be on people's draft boards. Those are going to be on someone's roster, maybe, likely, in a 15-team, 30-plus roster spot league. Sorry, but I don't want to deal with that. And I didn't really enjoy that part of it. Was dealing way down in the bowels. So, but if that's something you love to do, then sell me on that idea. I'm open to being sold and getting back into the 15-team leagues and doing that again. But that's my take on it personally. Another thing I wanted to briefly talk about that I hear out in the fantasy baseball podcast world is I hear about sleepers and the debate about what is a sleeper, and I always think about Walter Solchek from The Big Lebowski, and just think my response to that is, dude, please, breakouts and busts are the correct nomenclature. And I think that is really what it boils down to. In my kind of just basic way to sum up the whole debate about it is why include 3 nomenclatures to describe something that really just needs to be described in 2. So if you must, just get rid of sleepers. That's a stupid ass name. And stick to breakouts and busts. If that's good enough. I mean, why confuse people out there with three categories of discussion about 2 things? No, that's stupid. I mean, I wasn't born yesterday. Okay. So what I have taken on as terminology and a segment that we'll have as part of our BadAzz Fantasy live streams coming up this season, during the end season, we'll talk about breakouts and bust, or people we really like versus people we're really not liking. That segment's going to be called Shit or The Shit. And because basically fantasy baseball, in my eyes, when it all comes down to when you break everything down, all the numbers, all the projections, all the realities once baseball season starts, these fantasy players are either shit or they're the shit that takes you to the championship. Yeah, and the more shit you have, the more trouble you're going to have competing. And the more of the shit people you have is the more likely you're going to win your league. So that's what we'll talk about. There's just some players that need to be highlighted that you need to pick up on your team, and then some that you just need to send like an old girl that you took out on a date, and you just need to send them to voicemail. And we'll try to highlight that. Hey, there's my one of my cats. It's Kitty. Hey, Kitty, what's going on? Her name is Kitty, but sometimes we call her Shitty Kitty. Yeah. And my daughter always says about South Park, where I think it was Cartman was talking about his kitty, and it's funny. Anyway, I don't want to get off track too much. So shit and the shit segment will be coming up, and that's something that we'll be talking about. Something else. So and again, if you have a reason that you think sleepers should still be kind of a part of our lingo out here, then let me know why you think that. Something else I hear out there in the fantasy baseball podcast world that drives me crazy every time I hear it, because I hear it so much this time of year, because everybody's trying to be a prognosticator and try to, be Nostradamus, is taking the black magic 8-ball and turning it over and trying to figure out, who's going to be that person that's going to put me on the map. Who's going to be, remember Greg Ansiker, who hosts or anchors MLB Tonight on the MLB Network? In April of last year, I think it was April, but it was before the season, he predicted that Albert Pujols was going to hit his 700th home run in Dodger Stadium in September of last year. And that's what happened. It wasn't the exact date as I remember the day, but it was the right location and the right series. And that was a hell of a call. And I think there's a little bit of that syndrome out there, so to speak, of fantasy baseball analyst trying to shoot the moon right now on a few players, to put them on a map or something. So don't always go for that worm on the hook, so to speak. Because what I hear a lot of, too, is the if healthy syndrome is pervasive throughout the industry. If healthy, you'll hear that so much. If healthy, or given good health, or if he stays off the IL, or whatever form of injury, healthy tag they put, if healthy. I really think it doesn't completely make a decision towards a player I'll draft and one on my roster. We all weigh risk, and sometimes we make aggressive moves at certain points with fantasy players, and some we don't. And knowing when and where to do that is key. And I think of injured folks generally as one of three. Here we go, these three categories. Not injured, injured, or they're coming back from an injury, period. I mean, thinking about this if healthy, if that, and if this, brings a lot with it. So not being doctors, ain't none of us doctors. We have access to a lot of information, but usually private medical information is not something that we're owed, and sometimes that is given out. But so we're not doctors, and you never really go. Do you really go by what the MLB teams put out or tell you a lot of times, or even the players and their agents and their handlers and their doctors and whoever else, insurance, whoever else is involved in all this? Do you really want to go by that? I think someone that gets paid in fantasy baseball, and maybe if I get some time, I'll do some research and study on just how that works out when a player goes down, how often are teams or players, even that combination of the information you're getting really pan out on players, particularly coming back from injury, going on injury, with respect to how accurate those lengths of time are accurate. And really a lot of times they just don't know. So there's a lot of, anytime you're dealing with someone that is injured or is coming back from injury, there are a lot of variables that you should consider have been thrown into this player's profile. That's why I typically prioritize players who are in the not injured category. And I know that sounds ridiculously general and almost common sense, but you would not believe how many people in the fantasy baseball world will draft, and at a high draft position, on someone who I would say I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. Because why on earth, and I'm talking about, it depends where they're drafted and where they're valued. But I'm telling you, when you take a chance on someone who's either currently injured or is coming right off an injury, depending on the various levels, and there's so many variables and levels to all these injuries and lengths of recovery time, and especially with pitchers, and we're already seeing that in spring training, just pitchers dropping like flies, and you need to know that you need to stay in that not injured lane as much as you can, and not be lured sometimes into that worm, because it's got a hook in it sometimes, those injured players. So we'll talk about that, and I'll try to keep you up to date on some injuries, or may talk further about injuries from the injury information I get from my analytics department. I might throw in there too that the MLB network is a part of my analytics department, and I forgot to give them credit too, and especially on injuries, because they'll pop up a lot of that, and of course on any of your Twitter and any of your social media platforms, you can tie into MLB news and injuries and stuff like that as well. But if you when you tune into our live streams, you're going to tune into a segment that'll talk about injuries, and that's going to be called our Broke Dick Report. That's going to be our own segment of our live stream. I think it's almost time to start the Broke Dick Report, but we'll save that for next week's live stream, where we'll start really looking at, as we near the start of the season, who is going to post, or more importantly, who's not posting, who's not going to show up on day one, who's no-showing. They'll make the Broke Dick Report. And more importantly, you need to know that now, if we already know people are out there, so you don't end up drafting people out there that are broke dick. And broke dick came from the Army, so if that offends you, well then you're on the wrong podcast. This is the BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast. This is not intended for your children. So if your children are over your shoulder listening to this, you need to tell them to get their asses to bed. They have school tomorrow. That is the Broke Dick Report. I'm just going to throw out a little tease for that. I can tell you one guy that'll absolutely make the Broke Dick Report. Maybe even multiple times. He may even make the Broke Dick Report Hall of Fame, and that's Byron Buxton. More to follow on that. I know Chris Towers with CBS Fantasy Baseball today is jumping up and down because he loves Byron Buxton, but I'm telling you, he's like that girl in high school that you always wanted to go out with, but she just ain't never gonna go out and date you, man. And Byron Buxton's never going to take you. He's never going to make the dance for you. Anyway, okay, projections. As I've heard many times on fantasy baseball podcasts, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that projections now getting ready for drafting, which is that's where we're at. We're in the drafting time right now. This is prime time for drafting. So projections are important, and where you get that information is important. And they most oftentimes, as they say out there in the podcast world, reflect median outcomes. So, and I agree with that. So that's why I think it's so important to be highly competitive in fantasy baseball, to go beyond simply going into a power ranking, a draft ranking, an ADP ranking in a platform that you're going to draft in, and simply go into that screen and maybe have a list of people who you like or whatever, but you're just using that. That's your only tool. I just think that falls way short of if you want to be highly competitive. So, and that's one of the core reasons why I'm here, is try to help with that. Remember, rankings are typically, unless they're, and you can manipulate some of these, many of these platforms that have rankings lists. So, but if they're in default, a default setting of some kind, they're usually set up on a 12-team standard league format, those rankings. So you can optimize in certain platforms that you use and change those up in a myriad of ways. Fantasy Pros, I got to plug them. They have, to me, an awesome consensus rankings system, and it's just so helpful. Go back to my BadAzz sessions, and you'll hear more about that and actually see how we use that to build our draft board or our tiers list or whatever you call your war plans. Out in the fantasy podcast world, I hear this a lot too, and I think some of it, if it works for you, that's great. And I've talked about this before, but I just think there's way too many people in the space that talk about wizards and aggregators, simulators, calculators, and I don't know what else, Buddhas, on and on about all these things that you can just throw in a funnel and spit out your great team, your super team, your dream team. And I just don't buy into it. I'm not that kind of fantasy baseball player. Although I've been very successful at playing. My performance levels notwithstanding, there are other ways, and I just don't see the fun in that. And again, if you go back to the concept, how I perceive it as you're a general manager and a manager, I just think the more you have to put your stake in this team. So how do you do that if you, of course, we are convinced or we're encouraged to take a look at certain players from our analytics department. But we need to add other factors and put our stamp on our team. So when we start hearing about all these high-tech wizardries that we can apply to our team, I'm not against them. I'm just saying be careful how much you put into that you don't take the love out of joining your love for baseball and fantasy baseball, and you start making that something that's not as fun to you, and you lose that kind of thing. It's kind of like playing music for money. I play guitar. I love going out to open mics. I don't get paid to do those, but I can come there when I want to. I can leave when I want to. I can play the songs I want to and love the experience of music. But once I start throwing it into this business plan, so to speak, business strategy, and I'm making money, it becomes a job. So I also don't particularly like when you relate a player as shares, as if it's, as if there's some kind of fucking certificate of deposit or something, or a fucking mutual fund or something. I don't hate it. I kind of hate it. Fuck it. I'm going to say it. I hate it. I just hate it when it's called, hey, and maybe it'll slip out in me. And if it does, hey, call me out on it. Because, sometimes we can be brainwashed, but shares, and investments. I'm investing in shares or whatever. Fuck that. It just makes the experience less fun. And that's why I developed my list based on other factors. And that's to further blend my overall strategy for drafting my rosters. It is to include factors that are important to me, together with consensus rankings and ADPs that are well established early in prior to drafts and season, the opening day. You join those to make a successful combo in your overall draft strategy. And that, to me, is really making it fun. So you're going to kick ass and be a badass because you are badass and you can do this. Of course, there's new rules this year that bring about new rules within Major League Baseball, as I know you're well aware of if you've been listening at all, paying any attention, been out, unless you've been in a fucking coma, and I hope you haven't been. That's just, it brings about a lot of variables out there I don't think anybody's real sure of. But one thing I am sure of is I think it's going to bring some interesting changes to the game. I think the pitch clock has the potential to bring a lot of, let me not say a lot, a certain amount, an uncertain amount of uncertainty on its effect of a player's performance. There's been a lot of debate and talk about how it affects pitchers who are typically slow or slow tempo, as some of the folks out there call it, and how that might affect their fantasy value this season. Is that changing their, because pitchers are creatures of, all baseball players, of routine and repeating over and over, repeating the same motions, the same. And I'm not pretending to be any scientist on this subject, but just to give you an idea, is that pitch clock too, I think, is not only going to affect those slow tempo pitchers, because we don't know how they're going to adapt and adjust to that, and then the limits to throwing over to first base and the different pitch clock rules about when the clock starts, when it stops, how many seconds you got when you're when runners on base, when they're not, blah blah blah. I think there's undoubtedly got to be some effect on that a little bit, and we'll see. But I think too, we call it a pitch clock, and I guess they had to call it something, but they probably should have called it, to be more accurate, a game clock, because I do think it's going to have effect on some of these batters a lot too. We're calling it a pitch clock. There's not only slow tempo pitchers, there's slow tempo batters, and you know who they are, or you know them when you see them. They get in the box and they step in and they take a pitch, step back out, take their fucking gloves and take their Velcro strap or whatever and restrap their gloves. They maybe hit their nose, wipe their brow, fucking hit the top of their hat, tap their bat. Robinson Cano used to be one of them guys that drive me crazy. I used to think, get the hell in the batter's box and bat. So I welcome the pitch clock from both the pitching perspective and the batting perspective, because I think those slow asses that take forever picking their ass days are over. I already see the effect when I've watched some, and I haven't watched a lot of spring training, but you can quickly tell when you go into that how much that's had an effect with the overall tempo of the game. Somebody's writing in, hey, I got to call out. Who is that? Well, I'm trying to pull you up here. This presents another challenge for me, and as you see, I'm struggling now with the camera and the screen because I'm trying to pull up these chats here, and people are sending in messages here. Hey, and that's Forrest Law just wrote in. I don't know how long ago. I hope I didn't catch you late, but I did want to shoot out my favorite team. That is Forrest Law, for those of you, well, you can't see this, is he's and thanks for joining me out there. I don't really have, he's asking if I have a favorite team, and I don't have a favorite team per se. I have had somewhat favorite teams over years. I'd say teams is I'm more focused on actually even players. And I think that's that fantasy baseball lover in me, is I love players, certain players. And there are teams I like. And that, by the way, goes into my drafting strategy, is I like players that are on teams I like, typically. But if I really love a player and they're on a shitty team, I'll still, target them. But I grew up in Indiana, so I was heavily influenced by the Big Red Machine in the 70s. So I would say I was kind of sort of Reds fan. I was on that bandwagon. It was one of the greatest teams and eras of baseball. But I just like a lot of players, honestly. Give me George Brett, Mike Schmidt, and Steve Carlton, Tom Seaver, and people like that on my roster, and I love my team. And new players today. There's so many great players out there I love to watch and follow, and teams. But if I had to give you a few teams that I do like to watch and see how I like to watch the Atlanta Braves, at least right now. I think they're an exciting team to watch. I think coming up, San Diego Padres is going to be a very exciting team, I think, this year to watch. I think the Seattle Mariners will be, and I'm going to throw in this one, and I've heard this said, and I'm watching the Texas Rangers. Don't know if it's going to be this year, but I'll be eager to watch them to see how they improve from last year. Of course, I live 30 miles south of Houston, Texas, so I have rooted for the Astros at times. I got to be honest with you, though, the 2017 sign stealing scandal had a lot to do with taking some of my love for them. But hey, I'm there. Hey, my Jer Bear's out there. He told me to keep it rocking. I'm going to keep it rocking, brother. Yeah, he's old Jer Bear. He's my old Army buddy, my best friend in the world out there. And I'll tell you, if your best friend tunes in, because I don't go out here and tell family and friends, hey, I've got a fantasy baseball podcast. Come join it so I have people listening. And I don't do that because what I'm trying to attract is people who love fantasy baseball. So if you love fantasy baseball or baseball in general, tune in. I don't need mom on here to listen to me ramble about fantasy baseball, something she has absolutely no interest in for the sake of having a few viewers or what have you, I don't know how else to say it. Okay, back to where I was. New rules, though, no shit. Watch those batters because they have to be in that batter's box ready to hit with 8 seconds or more on the clock. So they have to get their shit together, so to speak, as well. And of course, the bigger bags, the bigger bases, first, second, third base, are larger, I think by 3 inches. In some, I can't remember specifically, but yeah. So there, we'll talk a lot about the effect on stolen bases with respect to that. I think one of the things that MLB changed, and I mentioned this in an earlier session, that's really a change that I think is going to have some effect as well, is the idea how they did the scheduling. I've talked about this in previous editions, but just in a general sense, no longer when you're in a certain division, you might play your divisional opponents 19 or 20 times a year. I think it's reduced this year to like 13 or something for each team within your division. So then these teams will make up those added games throughout the rest of Major League. So what does that mean? What variable does that to interject into fantasy baseball? I think it has some significance in that when you have pitchers, so to speak, and I said pitchers, I bet that popped really loud there. But anyway, when you have pitchers that are in like what we would consider a weaker division of weaker rosters, hitting rosters, that when you have pitchers in those divisions, you would maybe give them a little bit of bump because you know they're going to play, let's pick on the AL Central. You know, you're the Cleveland Indians and you're a pitcher, you know, well, my gosh, you got some real winners there to be playing against, you know, during the season. You get, you know, Detroit and what is it, Kansas City, whatever. But you're going to play, back in the old previous years, you'd play them often, and that'd give you a little bump maybe to a pitcher. And now I say that bump is less significant in those weaker divisions because now they're going to have to play a greater proportion of their schedule is going to be made up of other teams throughout the major leagues. Okay, it took me forever to explain that. But also, you can look at StatCast for slow tempo players. They have statistics on who those folks are, and I talked about that in the BadAzz sessions on draft preparation. So go check that out. I think one of the favorite questions I've ever heard was from my buddy Jared Bear, and I've got to throw this out to y'all, is if I was going to go to spring training this year, but I didn't, and I was talking to him about going and how I would maybe try to talk to some of the young up-and-comers, the risers, you know, players, and see if I could do a little short interview or something with them. And he said, Jared Bears it gave me a suggestion that I should ask him the question of, have you ever farted in a catcher's face? And I thought, man, shit, if I asked that, but that stuck, and that was funny, and I appreciate that out there. Yeah, have you ever farted in a catcher's face? I know you guys out there want to know that, right? So I think that's a good question. Okay. I wanted to give just a little preview of the segment shit or the shit, just so I can kind of, you know, I have some visuals and stuff, and we'll do it in the coming sessions when we get either close to the season starting or certainly once the season starts. Shit and these shit is going to be happening because we're gonna find out who's who in that. I'll give you some examples. Don't, you know, these players, if any of you players are out there listening or your family members, don't take this personally. It just means you're not in a favorable category right now, in my opinion. On the shit list right now, as shit, in my opinion, would be examples like Fernando Tatis, Carlos Rodon, Luis Robert, Alex Bregman, Byron Buxton, C.J. Cron, Tyler O'Neill, Carlos Correa, Lucas Giolito, Chris Bryant. You get my point, right? That's what we're going to talk about. If they ain't worth shit, they're going to be on that list. Now, if you're on the shit list, the being capitalized, you want these players. I think these are players that are going to tear up the league. And these are names that you've all heard. I mean, from the top examples are like Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr., O'Neal Cruz, Gunnar Henderson. And some of these less spoken about folks, when you start getting down to some young bucks like Anthony Volpe, Logan O'Hoppe, James Outman, Jordan Walker. I mean, when we get in, and Grayson Rodriguez, Miguel Vargas, Tristan Casas, these are people that are going to be the shit this year. And these are people that I'm going to talk about more and how you should put them on your roster if you want to be a badass. Okay. I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. I wanted to tell you that ways to reach out and listen here and get our community growing out here in the fantasy baseball world. You can always go to our website at www.BadAzz with two Z's sports.com. That's www.BadAzzSports.com. They have BadAzz sessions, the learning blocks on there. The presentation slides are on there. I am going to be posting the audio versions of those BadAzz sessions soon. They'll be posted up there so you can listen to those as well. You can catch me on Twitter at roto_Rudy. So if you have questions about your upcoming drafts or anything that we've discussed in these podcasts, feel free to reach out to me and follow me on Twitter, and I'll follow you back, and we will discuss fantasy baseball issues there if you'd like. Look for BadAzz Fantasy Baseball on YouTube, right here where we're doing our live stream, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on Facebook. So thanks for joining in this week for the live stream. I expect to have some pre-recorded episodes coming up as we get nearer and nearer to opening day. So look for those special editions to be posted as things transpire that are important to your drafts and having a badass winning season this year. So without further ado, this is good night. And until next time, remember, if you suck, that's your fault. Tune into BadAzz Fantasy Baseball Podcast, and you won't suck, I promise you. Good night, everybody.